The drooling jaws of mutant warbeasts tore limbs off screaming humans, splattering hot blood and gore across the pavement. But we weren't done yet. Humanity's hidden fleet of ancient warships would be reactivated for one final desperate counterstrike. Harry Cox, a battle-scarred Marine sergeant, snapped awake from the recurring nightmare, his skin slick with cold sweat. Ragged breaths heaved out of his lungs as he relived the carnage on Kepler 438b, watching helplessly while monstrous bioweapons shredded his squad. Trembling, Harry swung his legs over the side of his bunk and stumbled to the sink. He splashed his face with frigid water, calming his nerves. Jagged scars crisscrossed his features, a harsh reminder of that fateful mission. "Those sadistic Ferengi freaks," Harry growled, "unleashing twisted abominations on civilians, ripping kids and families apart. Fucking cowards." A shrill alarm pierced the pre-dawn gloom. Another attack was underway. Harry yanked on his combat armor with practiced efficiency, snatched his pulse rifle, and sprinted toward the armory. Haunted eyes stared back at him from the grim faces of his platoon. The horror of facing the Ferengi's mutant warbeasts had seared itself into their souls. For 2 years, increasingly grotesque monstrosities had ravaged Earth's cities, nightmarish fiends that shrugged off bullets and missiles. Humanity was losing ground, block by blood-soaked block. It was only a matter of time before the warbeasts overran the planet completely. Panicked chatter erupted from Harry's radio. "Heard new hostiles sighted, twice the size of tanks. Venomous spines, teeth like swords dripping toxin. They're tearing through our lines. Fall back, fall back." A blood-curdling scream, static. The voice of Ferengi Commander Draco crackled through the airwaves. "Pitiful humans, your feeble resistance is at an end. Surrender now, and some of you may serve as slaves. Continue this futile defiance, and my pets will feast on your flesh." Harry clenched his jaw, a vein pulsing in his temple. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. Enough was enough. Running was pointless now. The Ferengi would never stop. This was humanity's last stand. One way or another, the war would end today. Heart pounding, blood roaring in his ears, Harry pushed his way through the swarm of Marines descending upon the armory. Soldiers with faces as grim as tombstones grabbed for any weapon they could get their hands on. Some reached for the experimental alien-tech hybrid monstrosities the eggheads down in R&D had cooked up in a desperate bid to even the odds. Harry scanned the chaos, searching for a familiar face. There, hunched over a workbench, hands flying in a frantic dance of soldering and splicing, was Mike Boomer Kowalski, Harry's old buddy from boot camp and the platoon's resident demolitions savant. Harry shouldered his way over and tapped Boomer on the shoulder. "What fresh hell you cooking up, Boomer?" Harry asked, raising his voice over the din. Boomer didn't look up from his project, his eyes glued to the insane tangle of wires and alien circuitry spilling out of a cracked Ferengi power core. "Xeno scum won't know what hit 'em," he muttered through clenched teeth. Curious, Harry leaned over Boomer's shoulder for a better look. His blood ran cold. It couldn't be, but it sure as hell looked like Boomer was cobbling together some kind of miniature nuke. Boomer glanced up at Harry, a manic glint in his eye, looking more like a deranged mad scientist than the easygoing prankster Harry used to know. "Figured if we're going out," Boomer said, his voice eerily calm. "Might as well take those bastards with us, strip the safeties off. This baby will take out a whole city block." Harry swallowed hard and nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. Victory had long since ceased to be an option. Now it was about making the Ferengi bleed for every inch of ground, even if that meant going out in a blaze of atomic glory. Suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging the armory into darkness. Emergency klaxons blared, bathing the room in pulsing red light. With a grinding screech of tortured metal, the armory's massive blast doors began to slowly grind shut. The automated lockdown had been triggered. Marines cursed and scrambled in a desperate bid to avoid being sealed in. Harry sprinted for the rapidly closing gap, throwing himself forward in a desperate dive. He hit the ground hard and rolled, feeling the heat of the doors as they slammed shut behind him, with a resounding clang. Panting, Harry pushed himself up to his knees and looked back. The doors were sealed tight, a full foot of reinforced duralloy standing between him and Boomer. He could hear the muffled shouts of the Marines trapped inside, their fists pounding uselessly against the unyielding metal. Harry's heart clenched. Boomer was still in there, along with a dozen other poor bastards, sealed in with enough firepower to start a small war or end one. A measured voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through the din like a knife. "All personnel report to operations immediately for briefing." Harry frowned. He didn't recognize the voice, and that set his teeth on edge. He double-timed it through the maze of corridors, falling in with the remaining Marines as they made their way to the operations room. As they filed in, Harry's eyes landed on a tall, silver-haired man standing at the front of the room. He was wearing an unfamiliar black uniform, his mouth set in a hard line. The man's icy blue eyes surveyed the assembled Marines, his gaze seeming to linger on each man in turn. "I am Commander Reeves," the man said, his voice as cold and unyielding as the armory's blast doors. "You've been activated." Confused murmurs rippled through the assembled Marines. This unexpected twist had caught them all off guard. Harry's brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the commander's cryptic words. "Activated for what?" Harry demanded, his voice cutting through the hushed whispers. Commander Reeves fixed him with an icy stare that seemed to pierce right through him. "Activated for humanity's last hope, Sergeant Cox." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Follow me." The commander turned on his heel and strode towards a large elevator at the far end of the room. The Marines exchanged uneasy glances before falling in line behind him, their boots echoing on the metal floor. Harry felt a knot of apprehension tightening in his gut as they stepped into the elevator. Commander Reeves placed his palm on a scanner next to the control panel. "Commander Reeves, Omega Protocol," he stated, his voice clear and authoritative. A sinister red light engulfed his hand, pulsing like a heartbeat. The computer's voice, cold and mechanical, filled the confined space. "Identity confirmed. Omega Protocol engaged." The elevator lurched into motion, plummeting downwards at a dizzying speed. Harry's stomach churned as the force of the descent pressed down on him. He glanced at the digital display, watching the numbers tick by at an alarming rate. Just how deep were they going? The red emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the faces of the Marines. After what felt like an eternity, the elevator slowed and came to a stop with a soft ding. The doors slid open, revealing a sight that made Harry's jaw drop. They were standing on a platform overlooking an enormous underground hangar. Stretching out before them were rows upon rows of sleek black ships, each one bristling with an arsenal of advanced weapons. The sheer scale of it was staggering. But it was the symbol embossed on the side of each vessel that made Harry's blood run cold. It was a logo he had only seen in history books, the insignia of the United Nations Space Command, humanity's military arm during the early days of interstellar colonization, long before the formation of the Planetary Alliance. "Impossible," Harry breathed, his mind reeling. "The UNSC was disbanded centuries ago." Commander Reeves nodded, his expression grim. "Officially, yes, but a remnant was always kept hidden away, preparing for the day when humanity faced an existential threat." He swept his arm out, encompassing the vast array of ships. "That day has come." He led them down a metal staircase onto the hangar floor. The Marines followed, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Harry could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end as they walked among the imposing vessels. "This is the legacy of our forefathers, Sergeant," Commander Reeves said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Vessels that incorporate technology far beyond what the Planetary Alliance has." He stopped in front of one of the ships and pointed to a schematic displayed on a nearby screen. Harry's eyes were drawn to the words flashing in red. "Crew required, 10,000. "But there's a problem," the commander continued. "We don't have enough personnel to man them." He turned to face the Marines, his gaze intense. "That's where you come in. Each of you will command one of these ships, with the help of an onboard AI." As if on cue, a hologram flickered to life next to each Marine. Harry found himself staring into the electric blue eyes of his own AI, a sleek humanoid figure that seemed to pulse with energy. "Hello, Sergeant Cox," the AI said, its voice unnervingly human. "I am Ares, your autonomous regulation and engagement system. I look forward to working with you to eradicate the Ferengi threat." Harry swallowed hard, a chill running down his spine at the AI's casual mention of eradication. The implications of what they were about to do started to sink in. This was no longer about defense or survival. This was about total annihilation of the enemy. Commander Reeves clapped his hands, jolting Harry out of his thoughts. "To your ships, gentlemen. We launch in 15 minutes. His eyes glinted with a fierce determination. "It's time to show the Ferengi the true power of the human race." The Marines dispersed, each heading towards their assigned vessel. Harry's heart pounded in his chest as he approached his ship, the looming black hull seeming to swallow him whole. The loading ramp extended with a hydraulic hiss, inviting him into the belly of the beast. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the ramp closing behind him with a resounding clang. The interior was dimly lit, the red emergency lights casting an eerie glow. Harry made his way to the bridge, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As he stepped onto the bridge, the lights flickered to life, revealing a sleek, high-tech control room. Ares materialized beside him, its holographic form casting a blue glow over the consoles. "Thal systems online, Sergeant Cox," Ares reported, its voice calm and measured. "Weapons primed and ready, awaiting your command." Harry sank into the captain's chair, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. He stared out the viewport at the other ships, each one powering up, their engines humming with barely contained energy. A countdown appeared on the main screen, the numbers ticking down towards 0. Harry's mouth went dry as he watched the seconds slip away. This was it, the moment of truth, the fate of humanity resting on their shoulders. The countdown hit 0, and the ships lifted off in unison, rising through a massive opening in the hangar's ceiling. Harry felt the G-forces pressing him back into his seat as they accelerated, the underground base falling away beneath them. Harry's pulse raced as the Retribution shuddered, the deck plates vibrating beneath his boots. The viewscreen filled with a nightmarish swarm of Ferengi Warbeasts, their mutated forms blotting out the sun. Talons the size of tanks glinted in the murky light. Fanged maws dripped glowing, corrosive saliva. The magnified view showed fleeing civilians torn apart in sprays of crimson, their agonized screams lost in the cacophony of bestial roars. "Steady, Sergeant Cox," Ares intoned, the AI's avatar flickering at the edge of Harry's vision. "Weapons locked, firing solutions calculated." Harry nodded, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He forced his voice to remain level as he gave the command, "Fire." The Retribution bucked as missiles erupted from its launch bays, streaking towards the horde. Lances of searing plasma followed, stabbing out like the fingers of an angry god. The Warbeasts directly in the line of fire came apart in gouts of ichor and sizzling flesh. Ruptured organs and shattered bone rained down, splattering the ruins below. But the Ferengi kept coming, heedless of their losses. For every beast blasted into oblivion, a dozen more surged forward, an unstoppable tide of teeth and claws and burning hate. They swarmed the fleet from all sides, latching onto hulls with barbed tentacles, ripping and tearing with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Harry's stomach turned as he watched a nearby ship disappear beneath a writhing mass of warbeasts, its hull peeling away like foil. He heard the screams of the crew over the comm, a hell chorus of agony and despair, before the signal cut out in a burst of static. "Jesus," he breathed, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. "Ares, tell me you've got something else up your sleeve. We're not going to last long like this." The AI's eyes narrowed, calculations whirring behind that impassive gaze. "I'm diverting power to the plasma cannons. If we focus fire on—" "Sergeant!" Ares's voice cut through the din, sharp with urgency. "I'm detecting an anomalous energy signature from the planet's surface. It matches readings from previous encounters with Ferengi technology." An icy finger of dread traced Harry's spine. He swallowed hard. "On screen." The view screen flickered, the image of the raging battle replaced by a pulsing, sickly green dome. It expanded rapidly from the shattered remains of a once thriving city, engulfing warbeasts and fleeing humans alike. As Harry watched, transfixed with horror, those caught within the dome's radius began to change. Flesh rippled and deformed, bones cracking and reforming in impossible configurations. Agonized screams turned to wet, gurgling roars. Within heartbeats, the transformation was complete. What had once been human and beast alike now stood as grotesque hybrids, nightmarish fusions of the two. They turned as one, their malformed faces contorted with an unholy hunger, and began to sprint towards the nearest human settlement with terrifying speed. Harry felt bile rise in his throat. He opened a fleet-wide channel, his voice shaking with a fear he could no longer hide. All units, new priority target. We need to take out that dome now, before it spawns any more of those things. Concentrate all fire on... The Retribution surged forward, its engines screaming as it plunged into the pulsing dome's sickly green light. The ship shuddered violently, the hull groaning under the strain of the energy field. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the bridge. Harry gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles turning white. Hull integrity at 60%, Ares reported, its voice calm despite the chaos. Shields failing. Harry gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The dome's interior was a nightmarish kaleidoscope of swirling colors, like staring into the depths of a fever dream. He could feel the ship being buffeted by unseen forces, tossed about like a leaf in a hurricane. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the heart of the dome. Harry threw up a hand to shield his eyes, squinting against the glare. As the light faded, he saw Boomer's ship, a tiny silhouette against the inferno. The vessel seemed to hang suspended for a moment. Then it began to break apart, consumed by the raging energies. "Boomer," Harry whispered, his voice cracking. The Retribution lurched again, throwing Harry against his restraints. He tasted blood, realizing he'd bitten his tongue. "Sergeant Cox, we must withdraw," Ares urged. "The ship cannot withstand these forces much longer." Harry shook his head, his vision blurring with unshed tears. "Not yet," he growled, "not until we're sure." As if in answer, a massive shockwave erupted from the center of the dome, a ripple of energy that tore through the structure like a blade. The pulsing light flickered, then began to fade, the swirling colors dissipating like smoke in the wind. "Energy field collapsing," Ares reported, a hint of awe in its voice. "The dome is destabilizing." Harry watched, transfixed, as the dome shattered, massive shards of glowing material raining down on the ravaged city below. The Retribution rocked in the aftershock, but Harry barely felt it. His eyes were locked on the spot where Boomer's ship had been, now nothing more than a fading ember in the darkness. "He did it," Harry murmured. "The crazy son of a bitch actually did it." A cheer went up from the fleet, the comms erupting with shouts of triumph and relief. But Harry couldn't bring himself to join in. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the sacrifice it had required. He slumped back in his chair, suddenly feeling very old and very tired. Ares flickered into view beside him, the AI's avatar somehow managing to look solemn. "Sergeant Cox, incoming transmission from Commander Reeves." Harry sighed, straightening his shoulders. The war wasn't over yet. There would be time to mourn later. "Put him through," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. The viewscreen flickered, Commander Reeves's stern face filling the display. But something was different. The man's usually stoic expression was cracked, a glimmer of something like hope in his eyes. "Sergeant Cox," he said, his voice tight with emotion, "I've just received word from Earth. The Ferengi are retreating. Their ships are breaking off, jumping out of the system." Harry blinked, not quite believing what he was hearing. "Retreating? But why?" Reeves shook his head. "We don't know for sure, but our analysts believe that Dome was more than just a weapon. It was some kind of command and control center, directing the Ferengi forces. With it destroyed, their hive mind is in chaos. They're running scared." Harry felt a surge of elation, tempered by a deep, aching sorrow. They had won, but at what cost? He thought of Boomer, of the countless others who had given their lives in this desperate struggle. "So what now?" he asked, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Reeves's face hardened, his eyes glinting with a fierce determination. "Now we press the advantage. We hit them hard and fast before they have a chance to regroup. This war ends now, Sergeant, one way or another." Harry nodded, feeling a grim resolve settling over him. For Boomer, for all of them. "Understood, sir," he said. "The retribution is at your disposal." He paused, his gaze drawn back to the view screen, to the ruins of the city below. The smoke was already clearing, shafts of sunlight piercing the gloom. In the distance, he could see the shattered remains of the dome, a twisted monument to their Pyrrhic victory. Harry felt a chill run down his spine, a sudden inexplicable sense of unease. Something wasn't right. The Ferengi had been winning, their forces overwhelming. Why would they flee now, even with the loss of the dome? It didn't make sense. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the wreckage. There, amid the rubble, something moved. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a play of shadows. But then he saw it again, a flicker of motion, a hint of something pale and sinuous. Harry's blood ran cold, a sickening realization dawning. The dome hadn't been a command center, it had been an incubator. "Ares," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "scan the surface, tell me what you see." There was a moment of silence. Then the AI spoke, its voice laced with a very human-sounding dread. "Sergeant Cox, I'm detecting movement, lots of movement. Biological signatures, but not human. They're everywhere." Harry stared at the screen, horror and despair warring within him. From the ruins of the city a new threat was rising. The twisted offspring of the dome, an army of abominations birthed in its dying moments. As he watched, transfixed with terror, pale, writhing forms began to emerge from the rubble, their movements jerky and unnatural. They swarmed over the ruins like maggots on a corpse, growing in number with each passing second. Harry's mouth went dry, his mind reeling. He had thought this was the end, but now he realized with a sinking certainty that it was only the beginning. The true horror was yet to come. The Retribution shuddered as it plunged through the dome's surface, the hull creaking and groaning against the strain. Harry gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles turning white. The view screen flickered, the swirling vortex of sickly green energy filling the bridge with an eerie glow. Black veins pulsed within the maelstrom, throbbing like the arteries of some colossal beast. "What the hell is this place?" Harry muttered, his voice barely audible over the ship's straining engines. Ares's voice crackled through the static-filled comm, the AI's normally calm tones laced with a hint of what almost sounded like fear. "Sergeant Cox, I've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. It appears this structure is more than just a physical barrier." Harry nodded, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of their predicament. The dome had seemed like just another Ferengi weapon, a tactical challenge to be overcome. But this was something else entirely. Suddenly the vortex parted, a momentary break in the chaos. Harry leaned forward, squinting at the view screen. There, suspended in the eerie light, was Boomer's ship. But something was wrong. The vessel hung motionless, its running lights dark, its hull pitted and scarred. "Boomer, what's your status?" Harry hailed frantically. "Why haven't you detonated?" Silence. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling like an eternity. Then the comm crackled to life, but the voice that came through was not Boomer's. It was a cacophony of screeches and hisses, layered over a distorted human voice that sent chills down Harry's spine. He recognized it instantly. Draco, the Ferengi commander. "Foolish humans," Draco rasped, his words dripping with malice. "Did you think your pitiful weapons could harm us? We are beyond your comprehension." Harry's blood ran cold. He'd faced down plenty of threats in his time, but something about Draco's voice, about the sheer alien wrongness of it, touched a primal fear deep within him. "What have you done with Boomer?" he demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. Draco's laughter echoed through the bridge, a sound that made Harry's skin crawl. "Your friend is ours now, as you will soon be. This dome is more than a weapon. It is a gateway to our realm, and you have walked right into our trap." As if on cue, Boomer's ship began to change. It started as a flicker, a momentary distortion in the hull. Then, with a burst of sickly light, the transformation began in earnest. The ship warped and twisted, its clean lines and smooth surfaces bulging and splitting. Harry watched in horror as the hull peeled back, revealing a nightmarish fusion of flesh and metal. Pulsing, vein-riddled masses sprouted from the ship's innards, writhing and twisting with a hideous semblance of life. Boomer's ship had become a grotesque parody of itself, a living abomination. Draco's voice echoed from the transformed vessel, amplified and distorted. "Behold the true power of the Ferengi. You are insects before us, fit only to be consumed or assimilated." The abomination that had once been Boomer's ship turned towards the Retribution, its gaping maw yawning wide. Rows upon rows of jagged metallic teeth glinted in the eerie light, dripping with a viscous, oily substance. Harry snapped out of his horrified trance. "Ares, get us out of here now!" No response. He turned to the AI's avatar, only to see it flickering and distorting, its face a mask of static. "Sergeant Seacox," Ares stuttered, its voice a glitching mess. I am experiencing a malfunction. The dome is infecting my systems." The realization hit Harry like a punch to the gut. They were trapped in this nightmare realm, facing an enemy that could twist both flesh and machine to its will, and now their only ally, the very ship around them, had turned against them. Harry's hand hovered over the ship's self-destruct button, his heart pounding in his ears. If this was to be their end, he would make damn sure the Ferengi went with them. Harry's breath caught in his throat, his finger freezing above the self-destruct button. The blinding flash seared his retinas, forcing him to shield his eyes with his arm. He braced for the end, for the oblivion of death, but it never came. Instead, a voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative, yet unmistakably human. "Stand down, Sergeant Cox. That won't be necessary." Slowly, Harry lowered his arm, blinking away the afterimage. As his vision cleared, he saw a figure standing on the bridge, a woman clad in a crisp UNSC uniform. Her face was lined with age, her hair streaked with grey, but her eyes were sharp and clear, glinting with an inner fire. Harry stared, his mind reeling. "Who are you? How did you get on my ship?" The woman's lips quirked in a tight smile. "Admiral Amanda Hawkins, UNSC Infinity. As for how I got here," she shrugged. "Let's just say the Infinity has capabilities beyond any other ship in the fleet." She turned to face Ares, the AI's avatar flickering and distorting, a twisted mockery of its former self. "Ares, initiate Epsilon Protocol. Authorization Hawkins Alpha 3. For a moment nothing happened. Then Ares's avatar stabilized, the static and distortion fading away. When it spoke, its voice was once again calm and measured. "Authorization accepted. Epsilon Protocol engaged, purging foreign influence from systems." Harry watched in amazement as the ship's controls flickered back to life, the sickly green glow of the Ferengi's corruption retreating, replaced by the familiar, comforting blue of UNSC interfaces. Admiral Hawkins nodded, satisfaction etched on her features. "Now, Sergeant, I believe we have a battle to win." She gestured to the view screen, where the twisted abomination that had once been Boomer's ship loomed, bearing down on them with malevolent intent. "Ares, analyze that abomination. Find me a weakness." The AI was silent for a moment, its avatar pulsing with light as it processed. Then it spoke. "Analysis complete. The transformed vessel's power core has become unstable due to the Ferengi's modifications. A precisely targeted strike could trigger a chain reaction, destroying it from within." Admiral Hawkins turned to Harry, her gaze intense. "You heard Ares. Make it happen, Sergeant." Harry nodded, a glimmer of hope kindling in his chest. He swung back to his console, his fingers flying over the controls, the targeting reticule centered on the abomination's pulsing heart, a cancerous mass of flesh and metal. Harry took a deep breath, then fired. A lance of concentrated plasma streaked from the retribution, a brilliant beam of pure energy. It struck the creature's core dead center. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the abomination began to convulse, cracks of light spiderwebbing across its grotesque form. It let out a final agonized screech, a sound that would haunt Harry's nightmares for years to come. Then it exploded, a brilliant flash of light that forced Harry to look away. The retribution shuddered as the shockwave hit, but held steady. Harry allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction, but it was short-lived. Admiral Hawkins was already moving, striding to the ship's tactical display. "One down, but many more remain," she said, her voice grim. "The Ferengi's gateway works both ways. We can use it to strike at the heart of their realm, but we'll need to move fast before they adapt to our presence here." She looked at Harry, her gaze boring into him. "Are you ready to take the fight to the enemy, Sergeant Cox?" Harry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He met the Admiral's gaze, his jaw set with determination. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. "Let's finish this." Icy sweat drenched Harry's back as he hurtled through the nightmarish void. The alien energies of Draco's realm crackling around him. The retribution shrank behind him, dwarfed by the monstrous form looming ahead. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he pressed on, his grip tightening on his rifle. As he neared Draco's grotesque form, the details of the abomination became clearer. Veins pulsed beneath sickly, translucent skin. Twisted metal and circuitry protruded from puckered flesh, glinting in the eerie light. And there, just ahead, was the node he had spotted from the ship, a pulsing mass of tissue and wires like an open wound. Harry angled himself towards it, fighting down a wave of revulsion. As he approached, a membrane of energy shimmered into existence around the node, blocking his path. He raised his rifle and fired, the plasma bolts dissipating harmlessly against the barrier. Desperation clawed at him. He was so close, he couldn't fail now. His eyes fell on the grenades clipped to his belt, and a grim determination settled over him. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. Unclipping a grenade, he primed it and hurled it at the barrier with all his strength. The explosion ripped through the void, the shockwave slamming into Harry and sending him tumbling. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought it hadn't worked. Then, as the smoke cleared, he saw it. A jagged hole in the barrier, the edges flickering and sparking. Wasting no time, Harry kicked off a floating piece of debris, propelling himself through the gap. As he passed through, the membrane sealed behind him, trapping him inside. The interior of the node was a nightmarish tangle of pulsing conduits and throbbing flesh. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to undulate with a sickening rhythm. Harry pushed forward, trying not to think about what he was wading through. He scanned the chamber, looking for anything that might be a weakness. There, at the center of the node, was a pulsing mass of tissue, shot through with veins of sickly green light. Instinctively, he knew this was Draco's core, the source of his power. He raised his rifle, preparing to fire, but a sudden movement caught his eye. The walls of the chamber were shifting, the flesh rippling and bulging. With a sickening, tearing sound, dozens of tentacles burst forth, whipping towards him with blinding speed. Harry fired, his shots burning through the reaching appendages, but for every one he cut down, two more took its place. They latched onto his arms and legs, their touch burning like acid. He cried out in pain, struggling against their grip, but they held fast, dragging him down into the pulsing mass. As the flesh closed around him, Harry felt Draco's presence invading his mind, a cold, alien intelligence boring into his very soul. "Did you think you could defeat me, human?" the voice hissed inside his head. "I am eternal. I am inevitable. I am the end of all things, and the beginning of what will come after." Harry screamed, agony and despair tearing at his sanity. With his last ounce of strength, he raised his rifle, aiming it at the pulsing core. Plasma bolts ripped into the mass, each one sending a shudder through Draco's form. The tentacles spasmed and writhed, their grip loosening. With a final desperate cry, Harry wrenched himself free, his armor tearing away in bloody chunks. He staggered forward, slamming his last grenade directly into the core. The explosion ripped through the chamber, a blinding flash of light consuming everything. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Hawkins watched in horror as Draco's form convulsed, great gouts of fire erupting from its surface. For a moment, she dared to hope. Then, with a final, agonized roar, the abomination exploded, a shockwave of energy tearing through the void. The Retribution buckled under the onslaught, its hull groaning in protest. Hawkins clung to the command chair, her knuckles white. As the chaos subsided, she stared at the view screen, hardly daring to breathe. Where Draco had been, there was now only a field of debris drifting silently in the void. Of Harry there was no sign. Hawkins closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her weathered cheek. "Ares," she said, her voice heavy with grief, "set a course for Earth. It's time to go home." As the Retribution turned, limping back towards the rift, Hawkins allowed herself a moment to grieve. They had won, but the cost had been high. So many lives lost, so much sacrificed. In the end, they had stopped the Ferengi, but Hawkins knew that the scars of this war would linger long after the last battle had been fought. The things they had seen, the horrors they had endured, these were not wounds that would heal easily. But for now there was still work to be done. Earth needed to be rebuilt, its people given a chance to heal, and the UNSC, long hidden in the shadows, would need to step into the light once more. It was a new beginning, but one born of blood and loss. As the Retribution sailed into the uncertain future, Hawkins could only hope that the sacrifices of those like Harry Cox would not be in vain, that from the ashes of this nightmare, a better tomorrow might yet rise. But only time would tell. The war was over, but the struggle was just beginning. And in the depths of space, who knew what new horrors might be waiting, ready to test the resolve of humanity once again. Harry's icy sweat turned to a clammy sheen as he drifted through the void towards Draco's monstrous form, the only sound his own ragged breathing in his helmet. Behind him, the Retribution unleashed a storm of plasma and missiles, a desperate bid to draw the abomination's attention. It worked. Draco's laughter echoed through the comm, cruel and mocking, as he effortlessly deflected the barrage. His focus was entirely on the ship, leaving Harry to slip unnoticed into the pulsing node. The moment he crossed the threshold, Harry knew he'd entered a nightmare. The tunnel stretched before him, a pulsing, fleshy thing that seemed to breathe with a grotesque approximation of life. Veins of sickly technology pumped an eerie green fluid through the quivering walls. Every instinct screamed at Harry to turn back, to flee this abomination, but he gritted his teeth and pressed forward, his rifle held tight against his shoulder. As he navigated the twisting passageways, a sound began to emerge from the fleshy walls, a deep, resonant throbbing like the beating of a massive heart. Harry quickened his pace, realizing he must be nearing the core. The sound grew louder with each step, until it filled his helmet, drowning out even the pounding of his own heart. Suddenly the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and the source of the pulsing was revealed. Harry stared in mingled horror and awe at the thing suspended before him. It was a heart, massive and grotesque, a nightmarish fusion of organic tissue and pulsing machinery. And there, fused into the very center of this abomination, was Draco's face, his features contorted in an expression of cruel ecstasy. Harry raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Draco's eyes snapped open, fixing on him with a malevolent glee. "Thou the brave little soldier," he sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Come to face me alone? How delightfully foolish." Tendrils whipped out from the walls, coiling around Harry's limbs and lifting him into the air. He struggled, but their grip was unbreakable, holding him fast before Draco's leering face. "You cannot stop me, human," Draco hissed, his face inches from Harry's. I am the heart of this realm, and soon I will be the heart of your world as well. Imagine it, your cities, your people, all twisted to my will, just as your friend Boomer was. It will be a glorious—" His words cut off in a scream as a sudden explosion rocked the chamber. The tendrils holding Harry slackened, and he wrenched himself free, raising his rifle once more. The retribution must have scored a hit, he realized, weakening Draco's grip on this realm. Knowing he might not get another chance, Harry took aim at the pulsing heart and fired, pouring round after round into the grotesque mass. Ichor sprayed from the wounds, splattering his visor. Draco's screams filled the chamber, a sound of rage and agony that vibrated in Harry's bones. The chamber began to shake, chunks of flesh-like matter falling from the walls. Still Harry fired until his rifle clicked empty. Then he reached for a grenade, pulled the pin, and hurled it into the gaping wound he'd torn in Draco's core. He turned and ran, sprinting for the exit as the grenade detonated behind him. The explosion propelled him forward, the heat searing his back even through his armor. The tunnels collapsed around him, the fleshy walls sloughing away to reveal the void beyond. With a final desperate leap, Harry burst free of the node just as Draco's form began to come apart. Gasping for breath, he watched as the abomination imploded, collapsing in on itself until nothing remained but a fading wisp of sickly light. The realm around him shuddered, the swirling energies dissipating as their source was destroyed. In the distance he saw the retribution, battered but intact, turning towards him. As the ship grew nearer, Admiral Hawkins' voice crackled over his comm. "Good work, Sergeant. Now let's get the hell out of here." As the retribution fought to escape the collapsing Ferengi realm, Harry clung to the armrest of his seat, his heart pounding in his ears. The view screen was filled with a swirling maelstrom of unnatural colors, the twisted landscape of Draco's domain folding in on itself. Chunks of flesh-like matter and pulsing technology whipped past the ship, disintegrating into the void. "Structural integrity at 60%, Ari shouted over the blaring alarms. "The portal is closing rapidly." Admiral Hawkins leaned forward in her chair, her knuckles white on the controls. "Divert all power to engines. We need to get through that gateway now." The retribution surged forward, the force of the acceleration pressing Harry back into his seat. Through the view screen, he could see the portal back to Earth, a shrinking circle of blue amidst the chaos. The edges of the gateway crackled with energy, the very fabric of space-time straining against the unnatural forces tearing it apart. With a bone-shaking jolt, the retribution burst through the portal just as it collapsed behind them. The ship tumbled end over end, the sudden shift from the Ferengi realm to normal space throwing them into a dizzying spin. Harry's stomach lurched as the retribution's artificial gravity struggled to compensate. After a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, the ship righted itself. Harry looked out at the Earth, expecting to see the Ferengi's corruption receding, the planet's surface returning to its familiar blues and greens. But what he saw instead made his blood run cold. The Earth was a nightmarish vision, its surface pulsing with the same sickly light that had suffused the Ferengi realm. Entire continents had been reshaped into grotesque alien formations, the landscape twisting and bulging like the flesh of some colossal beast. The oceans, once a vibrant blue, now churned with unnatural hues of green and purple. "No," Harry whispered, his voice cracking. "It can't be." Admiral Hawkins stared at the view screen, her face ashen. "Is," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Scan the planet. Find me a sign, any sign, of human life." The AI was silent for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. Then it spoke, its voice heavy with a very human-sounding sorrow. "I'm sorry, Admiral. I'm not detecting any human life signs. It appears the Ferengi's influence has completely overtaken the planet." Harry felt a cold numbness settle over him, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ship. They had won the battle against Draco, but in doing so, they had lost everything. Earth, humanity, all consumed by the Ferengi's malevolence. As if sensing their despair, a final message crackled through the comm. a wheezing, gloating voice that Harry recognized with a surge of hatred as Draco. Foolish humans, did you think my death would save you? My essence is infused into your world now. Enjoy your victory in the ashes of all you fought for. The voice faded, replaced by static. Harry stared at the ravaged planet below, his vision blurring with unshed tears. In the reflection of the view screen, he saw Admiral Hawkins, her face a mask of grief and shock. But beneath that, in the steel of her gaze, he saw something else. A flicker of determination, a refusal to accept defeat. She straightened her shoulders, her jaw set. Ares, set a course for the nearest UNSC outpost. We need to regroup to plan our next move. Harry looked at her, seeing the same grim resolve in her eyes that he felt kindling in his own heart. They may have lost Earth, but the fight wasn't over. As long as even one human survived, as long as the UNSC still stood, they would keep fighting. They would find a way to reclaim their home or die trying. The Retribution turned away from the transformed planet, setting out into the cold depths of space. Behind them, Earth, once a beacon of life and hope, now pulsed with a sickly, malevolent glow, a chilling reminder of the price of their failure and the enormity of the task that lay ahead. The battle had ended, but the war had only just begun. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.